The Bones and Bobbins podcast is now on Patreon. Would you like access to bonus episodes, digital extras, exclusive merch, and more? Join us in the Curiosity Shop at patreon.com/Bones and Bobbins.
Your generous support helps make the show happen and will also earn you our very eternal gratitude and entry into our private Patreon-only Facebook group. And you want to be there.
Seriously.
I promise.
It's like a party. It's really cool.
Yes. In a dusty old shop on a forgotten old street, you'll find two witches with books 3 boxes deep. Next to rusty old needles and faded red thread, you'll come in for yarn, but leave with pigments instead. Whether poisons or patterns, we're always discreet, where creepy and crafty and morbidity meet. Welcome to the Bones and Bobbins podcast. Hello, morbid makers. We are your slightly creepy,
Mildly disconcerting,
somewhat sinister,
delightfully discomposed,
opaquely odd,
merrily morbid,
marvelously misanthropic hosts.
and this is Bones and Bobbins Season 2, Episode 2. Mom, why does she look like she's sleeping? Anatomical Venuses and Medical Curiosities.
Fun.
Yeah.
I'm Haley from Red Handled Scissors and the Very Serious Crafts podcast.
And I'm Natalie from Uber Dark Designs, an official murderino maker, which is now True Crime Creatives.
Yay!
Yay!
All right. So what's going on?
Well, if you're a member of Patreon, you've heard us talk about our projects that we've got going on and upcoming for the year. And all of that will end up going to shit because we has Animal Crossing now.
Uh-oh.
The upside is that, you only get one island per Switch console. So I can't completely get sucked in because I have 2 kids that are like, when is it my turn? So I will still be able to keep track of all of my projects, but it also allows me to start creating a creepy house and actually lay down a foundation of what I want my creepy miniature dollhouse one to look like then.
Ooh.
So,
now that's something I didn't think about. That's exciting.
Yes. My youngest one she's like, I can't decide if I want to do cottagecore or goth. And I'm like, you could do cottagecore. And she was like, I think I'm going to split it down the middle. So it's like yin and yang. And she's got it all plotted out as to Fluffy Witch on one side and Spooky Witch on the other. And I'm like,
I like it.
Go for it. So it's kind of
yes.
fun. But yeah, so we finally got a Switch. And I did not realize that Just Dance would be quite so embraced in this house. So now it seems like we've got some family dancercise going on every day.
Wait, what?
They're having dance-offs. Like, from now on, I'm just going to be like, that's it. Solve it in a dance-off.
Oh my gosh. I want to come over and play Bowie.
Yes.
And, I mean, dance-offs are close enough to walk-offs.
Yes.
I feel very good about that.
I do too, Gotta work with what you got. So that's like the biggest new thing, other than the fact that, our country is a shit show right now, But
oh boy.
What is it not lately?
Yes. No. We're recording this on Monday, and the inauguration is on Wednesday, I believe. So, just giving the listener some context for our declaration of shit show.
Yes.
Because Lord knows things could rapidly change.
By the time you hear this on Friday, God only knows what the heck is going to happen.
I mean, I hope we will have a new president peacefully installed in the White House. That's my plan.
Yep, that's my goal too. It would be an added bonus if the orange tyrant was in jail somewhere, but, you know, I will just take peaceful new president.
I'm not even going to pick that up. I'm just going to leave it. So, this week I made 2 hilariously useful Xanax purchases.
Which is about right for you, because last year at this time,
yeah,
it was a Xanax purchase that led to this podcast.
It's true. Every time I think about that, like, trying to start a podcast in the middle of the night. Oh, yes. I'm glad that you were like, oh, yes, let's go ahead and do that. Because I had already bought everything.
I was like, count me in. I'm on that. That's got me written up. So what is this annual
All right.
productive?
So
purchase?
in the grand scheme of... this happens a lot because anxiety, life, stress, medication.
Mm-hmm.
But usually it's inexpensive things, like $10 things.
Yeah.
But this week I decided that I needed a mid-century modern end table with a bowl inset that mimics a sink and is cat furniture.
Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't think of why you wouldn't need that.
Nope, so that's my new bedside table.
Nice.
Yeah, it has a cat bowl. And I also bought inserts for my drawers to organize my socks. Which is not an abnormal thing for me to do. It's just that I really like containers.
Containers are nice. Like, I find, and I think it's directly proportional to the chaos that is life right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's that desire to contain things. I have long been a favorite amongst my yarner friends because I take great joy in weaving in ends. There is some bliss of making order out of chaos that I
like to untangle.
Love. And my friends are
yarn.
like, you should just start that as a business. Just put it out there that you will weave in ends for people. They send you your things, you weave in the ends, you send them back. And I'm like, that I would actually do because I love it. Just like the thought of everything having its own container in place is wonderful. But at the same time, I know that my art studio and area tends to get messy and disheveled. And like, I know my creative process is not neat and orderly, but there is that neat and orderly desire that is definitely there. I keep getting small containers every time we order our grocery thing, like our grocery order. I'm like, well, this is a container that we can specifically put this in. Like, now the girls have baskets for their designated stuff in the refrigerator, and they each have their own drawer of stuff because, you know, they have different food tastes, and so they'll have different requests for, like, the week.
Yep, so nobody's fighting over anything, and nothing gets lost.
Exactly. So I get it. I get containers, man. They're pretty fun. Especially...
I love a container.
Yep, I'm with you.
I don't think there's anything I like better than a container made to contain something specific.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So satisfying.
I agree.
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk about containers that are bodies.
That's really true. The containers we're talking about were definitely made very specifically to hold what they do.
Yes. But before we do that, we should probably take a quick break to thank all of our fantastic, and I truly mean fantastic. I'm not just like blowing flattery out there. Curiosity Shop members over on Patreon and give a totally normal and not at all creepy welcome to our newest member, Delia Lopez. Welcome, Delia.
Yes, welcome. You are the best. And we would totally go explore hidden old graveyards in the woods with you.
Haley will bring the containers and the big dick energy, and I will bring the light.
I'm not really going to say what kind of containers I'm going to bring into
Exactly.
the hidden old graveyard in the woods, but it's a container.
And now I'm thinking of a Chatterlane with like different Tupperware containers in all of it.
Yes, this is why I love Chatterlane so much. My Chatterlane is actually hanging right next to me.
Yes.
Anyway, that was going to go into an entirely different direction. We do have an episode.
We do.
About Chatterlanes, so go ahead and go back through our...
It's season 1, episode 4. It has pockets.
Well. All right.
I had coffee, so I know it. I know the thing.
Thank you. I have not had coffee. Maybe that's my problem.
So welcome, Delia. We love and appreciate you. Oodles and
yes. Yes, yay, Delia. All right. And as a kid who grew up in the 80s and 90s, a catalog of your namesake was the be-all, end-all.
That was.
And I don't know how old you are, but if you are of an age where you get that all the time, I'm sorry.
Yeah. The best mail day was the Delia catalog and the Sassy magazine.
Yes! Oh my gosh. I just remember the one with Kurt and Courtney on the cover, the Ain't Love Grand headline.
Yes.
So good. Yes. Anyway.
Good times.
That also is unrelated to what we're going to talk about today.
Not really. It had people in it. We're talking about people, right?
And containers. I guess they were technically containers for drugs.
There you go.
That was in poor taste, probably. I don't care, though.
We're all right.
I mean, yeah. I don't have anything redeeming to say. All right. So, today we are going to talk about 2 areas of advancements in visual anatomical science.
Yes.
And I am going to start out with something you may or may not have heard of, but you have probably seen, at least in a museum.
Yes.
And it is the Anatomical Venus. So, what is that? You might be wondering. The Anatomical Venus is one of my very favorite curiosities from medicine's darker and more creepy past. Anatomical Venuses themselves were waxwork models that, without getting your hands dirty, allowed a person to virtually dissect a very lifelike human body and explore the anatomical structures within. They were usually strikingly beautiful women, posed in a reclining position and wearing a peaceful or euphoric facial expression. Some people also describe this facial expression as orgasmic, and that honestly is true. Or ecstatic, but what they mean is orgasmic, and they do kind of look like they're coming. So, just there's that.
The facial expression is definitely a juxtaposition to the rest of it.
Well, I mean, yes and no. They are all like, very sound and healthy looking. And if they don't look like they are in the middle of having an orgasm, they look like they're sleeping. And, like, very peacefully.
So that's postcoital then?
Yeah, they've already passed out. So they were both a work of art and a work of science, and they are deeply, deeply unsettling to look at.
Yes.
I think Zoe Williams introduced that visceral discomfort pretty perfectly in her article, Cadavers in Pearls, Meet the Anatomical Venus, which covered the release of the Morbid Anatomy Museum's book, The Anatomical Venus, which I also used a lot in preparing for this particular episode. In the article, she said, quote, "It is a truism of sitcoms that whenever there's a conversation about violence towards testicles, men always cross their legs. As women, reading Anatomical Venus, you will want to fold yourself protectively over everything, wrap your arms around your kidneys and liver, run some barbed wire around your reproductive area." So...
That is accurate.
It is, and it's like, you know what? I'm not gonna come up with something more perfect than that. So, Zoe Williams, she
Spot on.
seems to be a woman after my own heart and prose. All right. So, why exactly were these waxwork sculpture teaching tools beautiful women? Well, there are probably several reasons, and several answers to that question. The first being because men. And the second having to do with the opportunity to look at anatomy and to physically dissect it while still being somehow removed from the cold truth of death. The Venuses themselves romanticize the idea of death rather than the fact of it. And so they also, in addition to being teaching tools, allowed people to indulge in the morbid curiosity that most humans share. And they also sort of embodied and also sidestepped at the same time the peak taboos of their era. These were unclothed women, openly laid out on display for the public eye, but it was okay because it was science and art and sometimes religion, and not pornography. You may be wondering who started this waking nightmare and why the hell they would do that.
Guessing it's a guy.
All right. Yeah. So to understand how we got to here, we have to go back a little bit in time to the 17th century. The precursor to the life-size or half-size, there were several variations, of the Anatomical Venus came in the form of dissectable ivory dolls. And some of these dolls were men, but most were women, and the male-bodied dolls were far less detailed than the female-bodied dolls. There is some debate as to what they were made for and how they were actually used at the time. Some have even suggested that the dolls may have been used by the extremely modest as a tool for showing a doctor an area where they were experiencing pain or injury without needing to be personally physically examined. But more likely, they were simply curiosities that gentlemen might have kept around in their literal curiosity cabinets. Because curiosity cabinets, or Wunderkammers, are the precursor to natural history museums.
Yes.
And so, I've seen these ivory dolls. Some of them are quite beautiful, but they're certainly not as detailed as the waxwork Anatomical Venus. And it really just looks like somebody wanted to giggle a bit while taking apart a lady. Look them up, or perhaps I will put a picture up, but there's something that makes you go, huh, all right, and then move on. All right, so onward to the life-size Anatomical Venus. Many of these unsettling works of art emerged in the 18th century from La Specola, which means the observatory, which was a workshop for Florence's Museum for Physics and Natural History, which also, fun fact, had early ties to the Medici family.
Ah.
Yes. Which, if you are a history nerd, you know that the Medici family is tied to, like, everything.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, now, La Specola still exists, and it's a museum of zoology and natural history. And many of the most famous Venuses were made for La Specola by the ridiculously talented Italian sculptor Clemente Michelangelo Susini, who, in some places, is credited for having invented the Anatomical Venus itself. But that's probably not accurate, although I think it is fair to say that he made what would become the Anatomical Venus by which all others were measured, or against which all others were measured. So,
seems fair.
Close enough, I suppose. So, Susini's most renowned work was in the form of wax anatomical models that accurately represented partially dissected corpses. Yes. Corpses. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, ethically sourced human cadavers were in really short supply for 18th century students of medicine. And I'm sure that if you're listening to this, you have probably heard about body snatching and burking and underground cadaver sales, and know why that was a problem. It wasn't that there weren't enough dead bodies. There were certainly plenty of those, but there weren't enough bodies that were specifically given up to science.
Yeah.
And along with there simply not being enough ethically sourced bodies, dead bodies were also messy. And they smelled bad.
A little bit.
And, yeah, they weren't ideal for moving around and taking to different locations because they couldn't be preserved long term. In a way that would still allow manipulation. Plus, medical abnormalities and diseases could be represented in the Anatomical Venus, and in equally beautiful and detailed wax plaques of just parts of the body, without danger of accidental transmission, giving students the opportunity to view maladies that they might not otherwise have been able to study before experiencing them in the field. Plus, as an added financial bonus, the everyday public, men and women alike, was more than happy to pay a fee to have a look at a beautiful naked wax woman. So, commissioning one in the name of science could also help pad your pockets. And if we're honest, they were likely more for spectacle than they ever were for being a teaching tool, even though they are so detailed and are so beautifully laid out anatomically.
I agree.
In the 1870s, Susini crafted what is known as the Medici Venus, an anatomical Venus by which, as I said earlier, all subsequent creations would be judged. She had glass eyes, human eyelashes, and real hair. She also contained 7 dissectable layers of organs. So that's fun. And this Venus, like most, looked anything but dead. But at the same time, when you actually look at her and the others of her kind, it's also pretty unmistakably true that they aren't just sleeping. So they're very unsettling to look at. And if that doesn't rattle you enough, nearly every anatomical Venus, and I did not come across any in my research for which this was not true. They are basically all pregnant.
Oh my god.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I did not know that aspect.
Yes.
And I've seen them. I don't. Yes.
Yeah, and even the ivory dolls before that, even if they don't look pregnant on the outside, there is, generally speaking, a fetus in the womb.
Ugh.
So, many of the Venuses were gynecological in nature. And at least nominally, they were made to be used as teaching tools for doctors and midwives. It's more likely that the anatomical plaques that were basically cross-sections of the body were actually used in that way. They were also made by very talented sculptors. But it does not seem to me that most of the Venuses were actually teaching anyone anything except for scandal.
Yeah.
So, unsettlingly, but unsurprisingly, as I said, nearly all of the Venuses that feature reproductive organs are also pregnant, because that's the only use we had for women at the time, right?
Fucking
Yeah.
patriarchy.
And so they carry tiny fetuses in their wombs. Fetuses that came out. That was almost universally true, that there was a removable part on the womb and you could lift out the fetus. The weird thing about this is that the fetuses were often far too baby-shaped for their presumed gestational age, just given the size that they were. And so I don't know that they would have known that at the time. I'm not sure at what point in science the different stages of development were clearly known. I can picture a formaldehyde-laden display at the museum that I used to go to all the time as a kid.
The Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago had a room like that. Is that the same one you're talking about?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep. I know the wall. Like, as soon as you said it, I was like, yep.
Yeah, it's that wall. and I just can't quite read the plaques. So, mentally, that is. To make that mental image even a bit worse, some also included disembodied, very clearly male hands, either holding the woman down or performing a procedure or other intervention. So there's
Ew.
like this anatomical Venus, like spread
Flayed.
eagle.
Oh.
And there are, there's specifically one, or there are specifically two that I'm thinking of. One is of a C-section being performed, and one is of an assisted birth in a very questionable technique. But there are just, like, hands with shirt collars and the, like, first inch of a suit sleeve that are just floating around these women.
Oh my God.
Doing things.
No.
Yeah. It's So if you're wondering where all the dudes are, not the disembodied hands, but why there aren't
Disembodied dudes.
anatomical atoms or Aries or what's the love one? Anyway, doesn't matter. Eros? There we go.
Yeah.
Eros. Anatomical Eros. If you're wondering why those don't seem to have existed, well, they did, but they weren't nearly as detailed and artfully made. They were almost always completely splayed, or not splayed, flayed, which is even worse.
I'm like, that didn't get better.
I mean, it similar, just with innards. But they were almost always flayed and usually did not have skin.
Ew.
On, like, it was usually just the internal structures.
Okay.
Whereas in the anatomical Venuses, like, the beauty was still there, sort of juxtaposed with the gore.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case with the male anatomical models. They look a lot like teaching diagrams and models look today.
Like, I guess I understand why there would be more Venuses, because especially then, you know, doctoring was man's business, and so it would be male doctors, and they don't have the parts, so they would need more of instruction than a woman who's like, I mean, even then, I mean, it's not like we know exactly what's going on with our bodies, but we have more of an idea.
Oh, I'm headed there.
So, oh, joy.
So one of the creepier reasons that there are a lot of Venuses and not men was the idea that in order for men of science to have their interest held by being doctors, they had to be sort of seduced by it. Like the idea of it.
Like the access to free drugs wouldn't have been enough? I would have thought
I
that'd
don't know.
been luring up.
Yeah. No, cocaine in your blood. But anybody could go to the chemist and be like, hi, I would like some cocaine, please.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, there was a while where everybody was on, like, laudanum or cocaine or heroin, you know, just 'cause.
Yeah.
All right, so, like I said, guys did exist, but they weren't works of art. And it seems kind of funny to me, and like you brought up, that men wanted to focus primarily on female anatomy, and yet it somehow, to date, still remains a mystery to men, and doctors today are decidedly not excluded from that statement.
Right.
Like, medications are made, like, the doses of medications are made for men. The, like, mobility aids are made with the structure of an average man in mind. And yet, these dudes spent all of this time staring at the innards of lady parts and not learning anything.
Right.
Yeah. Now that we have that somewhat distasteful image in our minds, let's talk about how they were made, because that's really cool.
That is cool.
Yeah. So the process of making an anatomical model at the time required significant skill and knowledge. Usually both an artist and anatomist were involved, and generally speaking, the artist was a renowned sculptor. And so real organs were used likely as visual references and not for making molds, because organ shapes deflate after death. And so it's likely that the artist and the anatomists were working together to create each individual work of art to look alive through artistic interpretation of the dead organ. And so they were probably hand molded as opposed to cast, which I think is mind-blowing if you look at the details. Also, I just kind of like the idea of, like, hospital sort of randomly showing up with an organ or a body part and being like, I heard you needed a leg. Like, okay.
Body part delivery.
Yeah, ding, ding, ding. So, Eleanor Crook, a waxworker who has restored some of these anatomical pieces that are available for viewing in museums and in collections, also has concluded that they were likely molded by hand and not cast, because even today they are so lifelike and do not have the hallmarks of dead tissue.
Gotcha.
And so they were obviously made to look alive, even though they were sculpted cadavers. Which is interesting.
It is.
But then the Venuses sort of straddle that life and death idea in interesting ways. So, if applicable, once they were all sculpted up and ready to go, they usually had human hair and eyelashes and eyebrows and also real pubic hair. And they even had glass eyes, which we will get into later, hint hint. And by later I mean Patreon. So they were also very carefully pigmented, both outside and in, to provide a stunning mixture of beauty and horror. Some contained up to 200 individual body parts.
Wow.
And when I say that they were carefully pigmented, I mean that they look real. They were so artistically rendered that the wax looks as though it could be preserved human remains.
There is a great deal of detail and shading and coloring, and it's really freaking impressive.
And the colors are much more vivid than you would expect them to be. So there were obvious visual connections between the anatomical Venus and the idealized female body as presented in fine art and sculpture. You can't really look at them and not notice that they are very much related. And equally clearly, religion and the celebration of humanity as God's creation would also come into play, as did one of the Anatomical Venus's precursors, which was the practice of using wax in the preservation of the incorrupt bodies of saints. And so, at this point in human history, there really isn't a separation between art, medicine, religion, and philosophy. They are all part of a whole that makes the understanding of man and how man functions and exists. The Anatomical Venus would also eventually help to usher in the more modern wax figures and wax modeling that we're familiar with today, like the extremely lifelike attractions at Madame Tussauds.
Yes.
Which there are many pictures of me making wildly inappropriate gestures at various models. In the one in New York, photographed by my mom, because
that makes it even better.
Yeah. My favorite is definitely... No, I'm just gonna leave that out of there. Let's just say it involves Angelina Jolie.
Nice.
Yeah. So, fun fact that will definitely not interrupt your dreams in any way. There were also combination Venuses and automatons.
Nope.
No. So picture a wax anatomical Venus who breathed, making her chest rise and fall.
No.
That was an actual thing.
Abso-fucking-lutely not.
Yeah. And so there are so many, like with everything that we cover, so many different directions that you could take talking about anatomical Venuses and their impact as far as art and religion and everything like that is concerned. There were also many different artists that we could talk about, but for the sake of not speaking for 5 hours or more, this seemed to be the most straightforward path that I found in my research to get from then to today. And oh my goodness, they are so beautiful.
They are.
And so terrifying.
Yes.
I would not want to be alone in a room with them.
Especially one that's breathing. That's no. not at all.
Nope. That's a terrible idea.
Terrible. And yet, yeah.
And yet. Oh my goodness. So that is the Anatomical Venus.
Oh, that was a good one. Oh, I like that. I don't know. I so much love the whole, especially the marriage of art and science.
Me too.
For some reason, we tend to say they're wildly separate, and I never understood that. When
I don't think they're able to be separated, personally.
But yeah, so they're my two favorite subjects. So
yeah. And I should say, oh my goodness, if you think the Anatomical Venuses are interesting, the book, The Anatomical Venus, Wax, God, Death, and the Ecstatic, by the founder of the Morbid Anatomy Museum, is a thing that you're gonna want to flip
totally added it to my book list as soon as...
Yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful book.
That's very exciting. Very exciting. So,
yeah.
Cadavers have long been a necessary tool for instruction and research. And today I'm going to talk about the man and the process that revolutionized how they get used, and increased the accessibility of them. Mm-hmm. So this man is Gunther von Hagens, born Gunther Gerhard Liebchen on January 10th, 1945 in Alt.
Can I tell you how to pronounce it for real?
Did I spell it? Did I say it wrong? I know Liebchen's correct. Is
Gunther.
Gunther. Is Gerhard correct?
Is it H-A-R-D-T?
Nope. No T. G-E-R-H-R-D.
Yeah, say it like a T.
Okay.
Yep. Anyway.
So, meine Liebchen was born in Alt, Scotland, which was a German-annexed Poland. And his parents took him at the ripe old age of 5 days on a 6-month trek to flee what was basically imminent Soviet occupation. And they ended up in East Germany.
That's fun.
This is actually this story has everything, and I say that I wish I could say it like exactly.
I'm putting on my Stefan face.
Stefan, it's got everything. So, despite the harrowing start, they kind of settled, and life went along until they discovered. Was it Gunther? Gunther was a hemophiliac. And
that's not good.
No, he ended up spending 6 months in a hospital as a child following an injury. That incident kind of sparked his interest in medical science, and he ended up spending a shit ton of his life basically in and out of hospitals, and that just kind of fueled it further. So
yeah, that's terrifying at that time.
So and this is just his childhood. So imagine it just his life gets more exciting. So when he was 19, von Hagens entered medical school at Germany's University of Jena. While at university, he began to question communism and socialism and widen his knowledge of politics by gathering information from non-communist news sources. And he participated in student protests against the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia by Warsaw Pact troops.
Yep.
In January of 1969, disguised as a vacationing student, von Hagens made his way across Bulgaria and Hungary, and on the 8th of January attempted to cross the Czechoslovakian border into Austria. So he failed that attempt, and then he tried a second
I crossed that border.
But not back then.
No.
So he tried again the next day at another location across the along the border. This time, he was detained, missed an opportunity to escape, and then was arrested and extradited to East Germany, where he spent 2 years in prison and was forced into rehabilitation. West Germany...
Rehabilitation for what?
I don't know. Also, I want to know...
For being naughty?
I couldn't find why, but West Germany paid $20,000 for his release in 1970. And then he just continued his...
Paid East Germany?
Yeah.
$20,000? All right.
And then he continued his medical studies. So at this point, it's not like he hadn't achieved his doctorate yet. So it's interesting to me that they would have paid, $20,000 back then was, even now it's a significant amount of money to pay a government to release a person. So he continued his medical studies at the University of Lübeck, where he graduated in 1973. After that, he joined Heidelberg's University Department of Anesthesiology and Emergency Medicine, and he later became a resident and lecturer at the university's Institute of Pathology and the Institute of Anatomy. I almost said autonomy. No, it's anatomy.
Automatons.
So, and this is amazing to me. And then he married a former classmate, Dr. Cornelia von Hagens, in 1975, and adopted her last name.
That actually makes sense to me, since he had a criminal past.
Oh, I suppose. That makes it a little less romantic.
Oh, sorry.
No,
see,
okay.
This is what you get when you do a podcast with someone with autism. You get the romance sucked right out of everything.
Nah, you just hit us with the facts and we need them. So clearly he thinks way outside of the box.
Yeah, I like it.
Which brings us to 1977. 1977, von Hagens was looking at a collection of specimens preserved in plastic. And at the time, it was common for tissue to be preserved for medical study, but it was embedded in like a giant clear plastic block. He thought it would make more sense to push the plastic directly into the tissue cells and stabilize them from within, which would make the specimens rigid and allow researchers to actually hold them in their normal forms. And this is
interesting.
Where the birth of the idea of plastination began. Now, there's a quote from him that states, "One day, I was in the butcher shop in the university town where I was studying, and I watched the saleswoman slice ham. It dawned on me that I ought be using a meat slicer for cutting kidneys." Which...
Not wrong.
Not wrong! So he then spent the next 6 years perfecting this process. Now, again, like we've said, this is like, I am very briefly summarizing a lot of this. There's a whole lot to the process that you read more on. He patented it between 1978 and 1982, and he formed a company, BioDur Products, in 1978 to distribute the necessary equipment and materials for those interested in the plastination process themselves. So for the first 20 years, plastination was used to preserve small specimens for medical study. It wasn't until the early 1990s that the equipment was developed to make it possible to actually plastinate whole body specimens.
Yes, and I saw them right after.
Yep. So what exactly is this plastination? Well, let me tell you. In the simplest terms, it's replacing the water and fat contained in tissues with a reactive polymer like silicone rubber, epoxy, or polyester resin. This process, according to an article on Scribble, says it preserves bodies in such a way that they can be touched, do not smell or decay, and can even be posed. According to Body Worlds, the official home of the process, dissection and plastination of an entire body requires about 1,500 working hours and normally takes about 1 year to complete.
Yep, that's what I've seen. I saw Körperwelten, which is Body Worlds.
Yes.
In Germany in 2001-ish.
Nice. So it is a 5-step process. The first step is called fixation and anatomical dissection. Formaldehyde or other preservation solutions are pumped through the arteries to kill bacteria and prevent the decomposition of the tissues. This process typically takes about 3 to 4 hours. After that, dissection starts. Skin, fatty, and connective tissues are removed in order to prepare the individual anatomical structures and elements. According to the complexity of the specimens, dissection can take between 500 and 1,000 hours of labor.
That's a lot, but also unsurprising.
Right. I mean, think of all the tiny components our body's made up of. Step 2 is the removal of body fat and water. So when the necessary dissection is completed, the actual process of plastination finally begins. In the first step, water and soluble fats are dissolved from the body in a bath of acetone. Under freezing conditions, the acetone draws out all the water and replaces it inside the cell. Step 3 is forced impregnation. This is the central phase of plastination process.
Not funny. Also, anatomical Venuses.
Right, exactly. These two topics just kind of go hand in hand. Or
Yeah.
body part.
They're skipping along together.
So here the specimen is placed in a bath of liquid polymer. Again, it could be silicone, rubber, polyester, or epoxy resin.
Sure.
Which brings a whole, meaning to me wanting to do some resin art this year. By creating a vacuum.
If body parts start going missing,
right?
I know exactly who to call.
They're all ethically sourced, I assure you. The acetone boils at a low temperature. As the acetone vaporizes and leaves the cell, it draws the liquid polymer in so that the polymer can penetrate every last cell. This process it's really cool, takes like 2 to 5 weeks. After the vacuum impregnation, the body is still flexible and can be positioned as desired.
That's wild to me.
It is so wild and fascinating.
I didn't remember that. I thought that they had just, because there are sports playing bodies, and I thought that they had posed them prior to that, but that's wild.
No, and there's so many different positions. So this brings us then to step 4, which is the positioning. So every single anatomical structure, once they position them, it's properly aligned and fixed with the help of wires and needles and clamps and foam blocks. Positioning requires a lot of anatomical knowledge and a defined sense of aesthetics. This step can again take weeks or even months. In the final step, curing, the specimen is hardened. So depending on the polymer that's used, it's either done with gaslight or heat. Curing protects the plastinate against decomposing and decay. So again, altogether, it can take about 1,500 working hours and normally takes about 1 year to complete.
So it's like putting polymer clay in an oven for a really long ass time.
Right. So how do I sign up? Well, one can opt to be plastinated and then kept in the living room for eternity. This is not like taxidermy fun. The only way...
Did you say can or can't?
Can't. Cannot.
Oh.
It is not.
That's
no
fun.
Sadly, it is not an option. The only way to be plastinated after death right now is to donate your body to an organization that plastinates. And then once it's donated, you have no control over what happens to it next. You could perhaps end up, right?
I want to sit in the living room and look creepy forever.
You could perhaps...
Or just put me in the hall.
Right, right at the front door.
Peeking out the window.
Hello, my friend. Just put me on the porch during Halloween.
Oh my gosh.
You could perhaps end up in a bodyworks exhibition. So remember how our buddy is totally out of the box? He decided the accessibility to human bodies belonged to much more than just the medical field. He truly has the best intentions of everything and how he's created this and where he's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, sort of similar to the Anatomical Venus, that this wasn't, people were...
Right.
going to see these things, lay people. Although I think that was more monetarily driven than science driven.
Right. So von Hagens had originally designed plastination for use in the medical field. It was in 1995 then that he introduced plastination to the masses with his first Body Worlds exhibit in Tokyo, Japan. It's over the next 2 years then he would perfect bodywork, showing whole bodies plastinated in lifelike poses and dissected to show various structures and systems of the human anatomy all around the world. In his own words, the primary goal of the exhibition, creators Dr. Angelina Whaley and Dr. Gunther von Hagens, is preventative health care. Their Body Worlds exhibitions were conceived to educate the public about the inner workings of the human body and to show the effects of healthy and unhealthy lifestyle. Targeted mainly at a lay audience, the exhibitions are aimed to inspire visitors to become aware of the fragility of their bodies and to recognize that anatomical individual beauty inside of us. The exhibition intends to strengthen one's sense of health, show the potential and limits of the body, and raise the question of the meaning of life. Now,
Well,
right? Just that's it.
That's an awful lot to carry on the shoulders of an exhibit.
Right? But at the same time, when you're talking about actual human beings being used, yacht have kind of a heavy goal, I guess.
Yeah, and it is really strange. I've seen this display multiple times, and I think you have seen it as well, correct?
Yeah.
It's really strange to keep remembering that they are real.
Right. It's
that
super
this
easy
isn't a model.
Right. It's super easy
that
to
this
disassociate.
Is actually a human.
Yeah. Just look at it as art versus an actual human being.
Mm-hmm.
So each Body Worlds exhibition contains specifically real human specimens. That's it. It's all real human specimens, including a series of fascinating whole body plastines, but they also contain individual organs, configurations, blood vessels, and transparent body slices.
The blood vessels one is
amazing.
Like the full system blood vessels.
Yes.
And wasn't there a full system nerve also?
It's crazy
like,
pants. The plastinates take the visitor on a journey under the skin and provides a wide-ranging insight into the anatomy and physiology of the human body. Now, in addition to organ functions, common diseases are described in as easily understood manner by comparing healthy and affected organs. So it literally shows the lungs of somebody who has smoked for years right next to a set of healthy lungs. And that was the goal, was to show long-term impact of diseases and addictions like tobacco, alcohol consumption, but it also demonstrates the mechanics of like artificial knees and hip joints. Individual specimens are used to compare, again, the healthy and disease organs, and lifelike posed whole bodies illustrate positions that these organs lay inside the body. The Body World traveling exhibits have now attracted more than 50 million visitors over 140 cities across America, Africa, Asia, and Europe. And they are, beyond a doubt, truly an amazing combination of art and science, but they are not without much controversy.
Right.
So in 2002, which this I did not know, but oh, how it's so very us. In 2002, von Hagens performed the first public autopsy in the UK in 170 years to a sellout audience of 500 people in the London theatre.
Of course.
Prior to performing the autopsy, von Hagens had received a letter from Her Majesty's Inspector of Anatomy, the British government official responsible for regulating the educational use of cadavers, and the letter warned von Hagens that performing a public autopsy would be a criminal act under Section 11 of the Anatomy Act of 1984. The show
I like that it was 1984.
Right?
When this became a thing.
So the show was attended by officers from the Metropolitan Police, but they did not intervene, and the dissection was performed in full. The autopsy was then shown in November of 2002 on the UK's Channel 4 television channel, and resulted in over 130 complaints, but no charges were ever filed, and it was deemed to have been carried out respectfully.
Oh, I was expecting them to wait till the dissection was over and then arrest.
Right, but that was just the start of the controversies. Now, the two biggest...
Well, there are many.
Right, the two biggest branches and categories of controversy come from religious group that feels it's unsanctimonious, and then those that question where the bodies come from.
Yeah.
So
that one was happening the first time I saw
still happening.
Yeah,
so
Gunther in Germany
himself says that every whole body exhibited in North America comes from informed European and American donors who gave permission in writing for the bodies to be slayed. The science museums that have hosted body works also need to have make this assurance. They have to have checks and balances. While I certainly never use for public exhibitions are unclaimed bodies, prisoners, bodies from mental institutions, or executed prisoners, von Hagens says. Chinese medical schools supply von Hagens with a lot of unclaimed bodies. which he plastines and sells to universities. Von Hagens used to take cadavers from the former Soviet Union, but he did stop after body trafficking scandals in Russia. NPR researched the issue back in 2006 and learned that there's no clear paper trail from willing donors to exhibited bodies. There's a reason for this, though, because people donating their bodies to Von Hagens, they signed consent forms to the Institution for Plastination. They pay to have their bodies transported to the facility. There, the donor forms and the death certificates are checked. That paperwork is then separated from the bodies, though, which can be used for displays or sold in pieces to medical school. No one will know for sure because each plastinated corpse is made anonymous to protect its privacy. So now...
Which does make some sense.
It does make some sense. Also, I mean, this was 2006. I'm guessing by now there's a better system in place to still maintain anonymity, but also a proper tracking system to ensure that that's not, that there's nothing weird going on.
I don't know. I remember it being a concern that it was that many of the bodies in the original layout that I saw were donated by Chinese medical schools, and it wasn't necessarily the ethics weren't necessarily clear.
Which, and valid. As recently as 2018, the BBC covered great upset over the exhibit in Australia. The group of objectors, who included doctors, lawyers, and scientists, all called for the exhibition in Sydney to be shut down. They asserted that it may include bodies of executed Chinese inmates, including political prisoners. Now, Gunther's team has strongly denied the allegations, calling them lies and sensationalism. They say that 20 cadavers were legally provided by a medical university in China, where hospitals had determined them to be unclaimed corpses. In an open letter to Australian politicians, the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China says there is credible evidence, and that's in quotes, that the bodies may belong to, again, quote, executed prisoners and prisoners of conscience from China. Now, the Imagine Exhibition's chief executive, Tom Zaller, called the allegations completely fabricated and said that the bodies have been sourced correctly from Dalian Medical University. Here's the thing, is they said, we know for 100% fact that all the specimens used died of natural causes, suffered no trauma, and were absolutely not prisoners of any kind, he told BBC. We're not trying to promote, hey, pick a body up off the street. This is a legal fact that they were all processed properly, legally, and above the board for educational experience.
Well, if they died of natural causes and there isn't any trauma, that would indicate, at least to me, unless I misunderstand executions.
Yes.
That that would be pretty clear evidence.
Right. But even just prison conditions would have an effect on the body. So that would be evident. So after all, the exhibition is described as a blend of art, science, and emotion as a museum itself. Mr. Zaller then said the company had satisfied legal requirements in Australia, as it had in Europe, Asia, North America, everywhere else that had been previously exhibited. So if you're listening to us, you know that we at Bones and Bobbins are 1,000% for ethical treatment of the deceased, no matter who they are. We do acknowledge there is a horrible black market for bodies and parts out there, and I completely understand the passion to make sure they are not ending up in the exhibit. And
absolutely.
This exhibit does indeed raise all of the emotions regarding mortality and what it means to be human. After all the research I've done, I honestly do not believe that anybody involved with the Body Worlds exhibit would knowingly go about obtaining and processing a body without making sure that it was ethically sourced. Like, everything about how they do things, and also, again, you're dealing with actual human bodies in the form they come in. You can't suddenly make a body healthy that's been through the malnourishment of a prison system, or living on a street, or just the normal effects of being trafficked, or, you know, everything along the nefarious lines comes with a sizable taxation on your body. And that would be evident in anybody that went in there and then was processed through, and you look at it.
It would be evident in a displayed body.
Right.
It would not necessarily be evident in, presumably, there were bodies that were practice.
Yeah, that's true.
But I also agree that it does not seem to me as though there was any willing mistreatment or disrespect of remains.
Right.
But it's impossible to know for sure.
Exactly. Especially with trying to protect the anonymity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not even gonna go down the whole religious, spiritual debate, controversial side of it. Because...
Oh boy. I think there might have been protesters.
Oh, yeah.
At least one of the times I went.
So they do have a series of permanent displays and exhibits in Berlin, Amsterdam, Heidelberg, and London. In addition to Bodyworks, in 2010 they launched Animals Inside and Out.
No.
Which, you guessed it, is the animal version of Bodyworks. And it,
Nope.
It offers visitors an unprecedented view into the interior of the body of more than 100 specimens.
Nope.
From a tiny mouse to a 16-foot tall giraffe.
Nope.
It explores the every aspect of animal physiology and explains how animals move, breathe, connect, eat, and reproduce.
Okay, that's fucking cool, but nope.
I, for one, do appreciate both exhibits, and I feel they're super important on different levels.
Sure.
So, in 2018, von Hagens, who is still alive, discovered that he has Parkinson's disease.
Oh.
And he has declared that his wish to become a permanent part of the Bodyworks exhibition. His wife,
well, of course.
His current wife, the German anatomist, Dr. Angelina Wally, said von Hagens had said he wanted only her to carry out the work. Of course, in the very beginning, I thought...
That's adorable and sweet, I think.
So,
yeah.
At first she thought, Gunther, you're kidding me. This is something I would never be able to do, Wally told the Observer. But once her incredulity had subsided, she came to realize that she needed to carry out her husband's request. Quote, it's somehow finalizing his life's work, she said. Also, I understand now that it's more an appreciation and an expression of our love for me to do it. He said to me, Angelina, you're entitled to freeze me down to negative 25 Celsius for 1 year. But after that time, you really need to put your hands on me because otherwise I'm going to get freezer burn. So I have 1 year for mourning and then I will have to do it.
Wow. I mean, look at us not sucking the romance out of it.
Right? When you suck it out, I'll put it back in.
Am I like a romance dementor?
So when it happens, which is hopefully a long way off, her husband will join a growing permanent collection in the London Pavilion in central London.
I think that's really lovely.
And that is right. And you have to admire somebody that clearly he has the right intentions behind it if he's planning on adding himself to the exhibit. Like he is literally practicing
he believes very much in what he's doing.
Teaching. Right. So for all the controversy behind it, I think it is an incredible act of offering accessibility and knowledge to people that don't have access to it, might not have access to it. You know, for lack of a better way of describing it, when I was in college for a women's biology class, we had the Our Bodies Ourselves book, and one of the first things was, you've never seen yours? Go home, take a mirror. We have so many parts and things that we leave up to doctors, especially women. We have to leave these things up to doctors who then don't understand us necessarily, don't believe us, don't listen to us, especially Black women. poor black women are just, it's horrible. So to be able to have a tool out there that gives access, and then actually just having that tool out there says people deserve this access, is important. And I totally stand by it, and really hope that everything is done ethically. And again, I do feel that it most likely is. Has there been some that have slipped through that aren't ethically done? Again, probably, perhaps, but I don't know that it was intentional, and I'm sure that I trust that they've done everything on their side to make sure that it was done ethically.
Yeah, it seems like that is the case. And,
totally, you can see slices. It's crazy. So crazy.
Speaking of meat slicers, that actually it's wow. Wow, is the human body's really neat.
It is really neat. And there's so many, obviously, we live in a pandemic, so even if it is near you, you're not going to be able to go see it. But there is a plethora of imagery on the site, or in our show notes and all over the internet, where you can see some that aren't even parts of the exhibit. There's one that I saw that is actually like a female and a male ready to get a little intimate, which I was like, all right, that's interesting.
Sweet.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a thing. So...
Well, I've seen it by MRI. I may as well see it by...
Right. So, yeah, absolutely, if you can handle it. And it's not done... It's weird, because it's not...
It's not gory.
It's not gory. It's just weird. It reminds me of... one of my favorite things to dissect in science was the earthworm. Because you think of an earthworm, like when you open it up, that it's just going to be like a pool of mush. And it's not. So it kind of reminds me of that, how like it's different.
I was allowed to.
She's like, I skipped. I domed out. So yeah, that's fancy cadavers publicly displayed.
Fancy cadavers. Oh boy, yes. That is fancy cadavers. I feel great about that. So, I guess this brings us to the weekly worst way to die.
It does! Weekly worst way to die.
Da-da-da. All right, what's yours?
Anything involving a meat slicer.
Okay, that's fair.
That seems slow and not fun.
I guess it depends on where they start.
I don't know that there's a good place to start.
I mean, you might end up beginning with a lobotomy, and then you wouldn't care.
That's true. But the first slice would take... Depends how thick it's set to.
Yeah. I don't know.
Just meat slicer.
Yeah. Ew.
Yeah.
Mm. I think mine is having my spirit trapped behind the glass eyes of an anatomical Venus for all of eternity.
Ooh. No, man.
Just reclined and staring.
Oh my gosh, especially back then.
Watching people take me apart.
And I'm sorry, this may be inappropriate, but things were done to them. Things were done that were not nice. I mean, and you would have had to witness it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, because men.
Because men. God damn it. Indeed.
Anyway.
On that note, do you want to be spooky internet friends? We're at Bones and Bobbins on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and you can find us at plainoldbonesandbobbins.com.
It's true. And don't forget to rate and review our podcast. It pleases the internet gremlins, and it's how we show up in recommendations so that other morbid souls can find us.
Rings.
And I have recently learned that apparently the algorithm really, really heavily weighs actual written reviews. Stars are great, but apparently the written reviews are really what's taken into account when weighting things in the algorithm. So, just say hi.
Leave a smiley face.
Yeah, right. Whatever you want.
Rock hands.
Please leave us a comment.
We need morbid souls because project. We'll announce it later.
To put in to things.
Containers.
Wow.
And on that note, let us leave you with some advice that you should really never ever forget.
No.
Lock your doors.
And don't run with scissors.
Each episode of the Bones and Bobbins podcast is written and researched by Haley Pierson-Cox and Natalie Hoyce. Our music was composed by Loyalty Freak Music. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Bones and Bobbins. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify, or check us out wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts so you won't miss a minute of our strange and creepy content.